The first time anyone saw the new teacher, she was standing in the middle of the road in a storm that should have knocked her flat. Rain came down so hard it turned the headlights into white smears and hammered the roof of my father's truck like fists. We were crawling along the flooded lane toward St. Agnes School, windshield wipers thrashing uselessly, when she stepped out of the curtain of water as if she had been waiting there the whole time. My father swore and hit the brakes. The truck skidded. For one bright, terrible second, her face was caught in the beams. She wasn't moving, not flinching, not shielding her eyes. Just standing there in a long black coat that hung straight despite the wind. Dark hair pasted to her cheeks, one hand wrapped around the handle of an old leather case. Water ran over her skin in shining threads, but there was something wrong about the way it touched her. It slid off too quickly, like rain on glass, like rain on stone. Then the truck stopped a breath from her knees. "Jesus Christ," my father barked, chest rising hard. "What the hell are you doing?" She bent slowly toward my window. I remember every detail because fear has a way of preserving things better than love does. Her eyes were pale, not blue exactly, not gray either, but the color of the sky just before lightning. Her mouth was small and bloodless. Her face looked young until you stared too long. Then something in it went old, not wrinkled, worn, ancient in a way skin shouldn't be. She smiled at me first, not at my father. "Good morning, Daniel," she said. I had never seen her before in my life. My hand slipped from the fogged-up glass. My father leaned across me. "Do you know this woman?" I couldn't answer. The inside of the truck had turned cold. Cold enough that I could see my breath. The woman's smile widened by a fraction. "The road floods by the cemetery," she said. "You should take the side entrance. The front steps are already underwater." Then she stepped back, turned, and walked through the rain toward the school gates. My father stared after her for a few seconds too long. "You know her?" "No. You sure? Yes." But I wasn't. Not really. Because when she said my name, she had said it the way my mother used to when I was very small and sick with fever, soft and familiar, as if she had stood over my bed in the dark. My mother had been dead for 6 years. My father drove in silence after that, turning down the narrow side lane exactly as the woman had told him. The cemetery wall ran beside us, slick with moss and rainwater, and the angel statues on the graves beyond looked half dissolved in the storm. At the end of the lane, the school loomed out of the gray like a drowned building rising from a lake. St. Agnes wasn't old by city standards, but in our town people talked about it like it had always been there. A squat brick schoolhouse with steep slate roofs, tall narrow windows, and a chapel bolted onto one side as if someone had tried to hammer holiness into the place after it was built. The kind of place where every corridor smelled faintly of bleach, wet coats, and something older underneath: plaster, dust, wood rot, old paper. A place where sounds carried strangely, where even laughter seemed to travel too far. That morning, the parking lot was a mirror of black water. Students in raincoats jumped puddles or just gave up and splashed through them. Umbrellas dipped and swayed like dark flowers in the wind. Thunder rolled over the rooftops. Somewhere metal clanged, sharp and lonely. As soon as I got out of the truck, I saw her again. She was standing at the top of the side entrance steps beneath the overhang, bone dry. Not damp, not drying off. Her black coat showed no darkened patches, no clinging water. Her hair lay neatly over her shoulders as if she had just stepped from a warm room. She held the old leather case against her side and watched the students come in with a calm, remote expression. The vice principal, Mr. Bell, was beside her, talking too fast. He kept nodding and smiling the way adults do around people who make them nervous without knowing why. "Daniel?" I jumped. My friend Owen came up behind me, hunched under a red umbrella that had lost one of its ribs, and leaned crookedly to one side. "You look like you saw a body." I looked back toward the steps. The woman was still watching me.
"No, nothing."
Owen followed my gaze. "That's her? Who?" "The new substitute, the one for Mrs. Keating." I frowned. "How do you know?" My sister heard the teachers talking. "Said she came in late last night and nobody knows where she taught before." He lowered his voice. "Supposedly she's taking history till Christmas. Or longer." We started up the steps with the other students. I tried not to look at her again, but I could feel her attention on me the way you feel heat from an open oven. Close. focused. When we passed, Mr. Bell put on his cheerful assembly voice.
Students, this is Miss Vale. She'll be with us for the foreseeable future.
Miss Vale inclined her head. No one said hello. No one joked. No one even whispered. It was the rain, I told myself. The weather made everyone strange. But as we filed past, I noticed something else. Drops of water that blew in under the overhang and landed near her shoes did not splash. They struck the stone and seemed to actually hesitate before flattening and running away from her.
I almost stopped walking.
Owen grabbed my sleeve. Come on. Inside, the school was louder but not warmer. Wet sneakers squeaked against the tiles. Lockers slammed. People shouted over the roar of rain on the windows. Yet under all of it, there was a current of unease moving from kid to kid, one of those wordless moods that spreads before anyone can explain it. By first period, the storm had deepened into something violent. The classroom windows shuddered in their frames. The lights buzzed and flickered. Water crept down the glass in thick wavering streams that distorted the playground into a rippling nightmare. History was second period. I thought about skipping. I even stood in the bathroom between classes, staring at my own reflection in the spotted mirror while the hand dryer whined behind me. My face looked drained and too old for 16. Shadows under my eyes. Damp, dark hair stuck to my forehead. A small white scar on my chin from falling off my bike when I was 9. You're being stupid, I whispered to my reflection. The boy in the mirror didn't look convinced. When the bell rang, I forced myself down the east corridor to room 12. That hallway always felt colder than the others. Maybe because it faced the rear grounds where the cemetery fence ran just beyond the schoolyard wall. Maybe because the radiators there worked only when they wanted to. Maybe because the windows were tall and old and rattled during storms like someone was worrying them from outside. Room 12 door was open. The class had already gone in. I stepped over the threshold and stopped dead. The room looked different. Not changed in any obvious way. The same rows of desks.
Same cracked green chalkboard.
Same saint's portrait hanging crooked above the shelves. But the light had gone wrong. It had a dim underwater color, though every fluorescent tube in the ceiling was lit. The air smelled of wet earth and old books. On the front desk sat the leather case I'd seen her carrying, and beside it was a glass vase full of rainwater. Nothing else. Just rainwater. The class was silent. 20 people sat staring forward with the strained politeness of passengers on a plane that's dropping too fast. Miss Vale stood at the board. She had written her name in perfect chalk letters. Miss Elise Vale underneath it in smaller script. History is what remembers U.S. She turned as I came in. Again, that tiny smile. Recognition without introduction. Daniel, she said. You're just in time. A couple of heads turned toward me. Owen was in the back row, giving me a look that said, do not make this weird. I took the only empty seat, third row by the window. Miss Vale folded her hands. Before we begin, she said, I like to know what my students already understand about the past. Her voice was soft. Not gentle soft. The way rain can be soft right before it floods a house. Who can tell me what history is? A girl in the front, Mara Jennings, top of our class, always first to answer, raised her hand halfway. It's study of the past. Is it? Mara blinked.
Yes.
Miss Vale tilted her head. The past is recorded, perhaps. The past is agreed upon. The past is survived. No one replied. Wind moaned along the window frames. Miss Vale began to walk slowly between the desks. People think history is made of dates and names, she said. Battles, treaties, fires, coronations. They think it lives in books. They think the dead are gone, and all that remains of them are facts. She stopped beside the vase of rainwater and touched its rim with one finger. But facts are only what the living are willing to say aloud. Something about the way she said living made the room tighten. Owen raised a hand, trying to break the mood.
So what are we studying first?
Miss Vale looked at him for a long moment. Your town. A few kids exchanged glances. Our town, someone said. She moved to the board and wrote the name of the town in narrow white strokes. Graywick, then underneath it she wrote, founded 1891. Her chalk paused. Officially, she added. A nervous laugh went around the room. She didn't smile. Open your textbooks, she said. We did. Page 74, pages rough. I found the chapter on local settlement and church expansion. Dry stuff. Mills, trade routes, the railway that never lasted. I tried to focus on the print, but the smell of rain-soaked dirt in the room kept getting stronger. And there was a sound under the storm now, a thin, intermittent tapping from somewhere near the windows. Miss Vale began reading aloud. She didn't read like a teacher. She read like someone reciting testimony. Greywick was established in the late 19th century following the acquisition of marshland and forested acreage by the diocese. Her voice moved through the room like cold breath. Then she stopped. "That," she said, laying one hand flat on the page of her own book, "is not where it begins." The tapping at the window came again. Tick, tick, tick. No one moved. Miss Vale looked at me. "Daniel," she said, "what was here before the school?" My throat tightened. "I don't know." "You do?" I shook my head. She held my gaze. Outside, thunder rolled so close the glass trembled. "You used to dream about it," she said. Every chair in the room seemed to creak at once. My skin went numb. "What?" Owen said, half laughing, half not. I stared at her. "I've never met you." "No," she said.
Not like this.
My pulse was crashing so hard I could hear it. The tapping came faster now. Not one window, two, then three.
Tick, 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 tick.
Students were turning in their seats. Rain blurred the panes, but shapes seemed to be moving behind the water. Long pale smudges passing upward instead of down, like fingers dragged the wrong way across glass.
Miss Vale?
Mara whispered. The lights flickered. For one instant, the room went dim enough that the windows became mirrors. And in the reflection, every seat was filled except mine. I saw rows of wet children sitting perfectly still, their heads bowed, their uniforms old-fashioned and dark with water, hair hanging over their faces. Their skin looked swollen and gray. Mud streaked their collars. Their fingers rested on the desks like drowned roots. Then the light steadied. The reflection was normal again.
Someone gasped. Someone else muttered a prayer.
Miss Vale's face hadn't changed. "This town," she said quietly, "did not begin with brick and roads and church bells. It began with a season of rain. Weeks of it. The river burst. The ground opened. Children vanished. The tapping became pounding. Hands. That was the first thought that formed clearly in my mind. Those were hands at the windows. The class dissolved into panic. Chairs scraped back. Mara screamed. Owen was on his feet. Someone shouted that there were people outside. Another kid ran for the door and found it wouldn't open. He yanked it again, harder, but it held fast as if something on the other side was pulling it shut.
"Sit down, Miss Vale."
No one listened. The pounding spread to every window at once. The glass rattled like teeth. Rainwater began to leak beneath the frames, not in drops but in narrow black streams that ran across the sill and down the walls. Black. Not dirty. Black. Like water mixed with grave soil. I backed away from the window, heart hammering, and that was when I saw it. Words forming slowly on the fogged pane beside my desk. Not from inside. From outside. Letters traced by a finger through the condensation, each one deliberate, each one appearing where no face could be seen. Daniel, my legs almost gave out. Beneath my name, another line began.
"I know what you did in the chapel."
I made a sound I didn't recognize as my own. Only one other person in the world knew about the chapel. About what had happened there last winter when Owen and I broke in on a dare and found the locked lower stair. About the thing we heard crying under the floorboards. About the old photograph I took from the hidden room and never gave back. Owen turned toward me. "Dan..." I couldn't answer. Miss Vale stepped between me and the window. Instantly, the pounding stopped. The silence hit harder than the noise had. Rain still battered the roof. Thunder still muttered in the distance. But the windows went still as sealed stone. The black water on the walls stopped creeping and clung there in trembling vertical lines. Miss Vale looked down at me with an expression that was almost pity. "You opened something that was meant to remain closed," she said in a voice only I seemed able to hear. "Now they know your name." I tried to speak and failed. Her hand rose slowly and touched the side of my face. Her fingers were freezing. "No one can help you once the rain remembers," she whispered. Then the classroom door burst open behind us. Mr. Bell stumbled in, drenched and white-faced, gripping the frame hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Every student turned. He looked not at us, but at Miss Vale. And in a voice shaking so violently the words nearly broke apart, he said, "You need to come with me right now." Miss Vale withdrew her hand. Mr. Bell swallowed. "They found a body," he said, "in the old cistern under the chapel." The room went dead still. He looked at me next, and that was somehow worse.
It's wearing your coat.
For a second, no one moved because no one understood what Mr. Bell had just said. It hung there in the room with the stormlight and the smell of wet earth, absurd and impossible. My coat. I was wearing my coat. I looked down in a blind, stupid panic, fingers fumbling at the zipper, and what I saw should have comforted me. Dark green parka. Torn cuff at the left wrist where it had caught on the chain-link fence behind Owen's house 2 months ago. School badge hanging by one loose thread. It was on me. I could feel its damp weight on my shoulders. But relief never came, because Mr. Bell was staring at that same coat like he'd seen it somewhere else first. And Miss Vale had already turned away from me. No surprise, no confusion. Just a calm rearrangement of her face, like this was the page of a lesson she had known was coming.
"Students," she said, "remain seated."
Nobody sat. Mr. Bell stepped into the room, breathing hard. Rainwater streamed from his hairline down his cheeks into the collar of his shirt. His shoes left dark tracks across the tiles. "Miss Vale." The vice principal, who spent most days scolding people for untucked shirts and gum in class, looked years older. There was mud on his trouser legs up to the knee. One sleeve had been smeared with something black that was too thick to be water. Miss Vale picked up the leather case from her desk. "What happened?" Mara whispered. Mr. Bell flinched like he hadn't realized the rest of us were there. His eyes moved over the class and then fixed on me again. I'll never forget the expression in them. Not accusation. Not exact. It was something uglier, the beginnings of recognition colliding with fear. He pointed. "Daniel, you too." The room erupted. Why him? What body? Oh my God, Owen shoved his chair back. This is insane. He's been here the whole time. Mr. Bell snapped, "Quiet." Nobody got quiet. The thunder outside cracked so hard it shook dust from the ceiling, and for a moment that was the only sound in the room. Miss Vale opened the door the rest of the way. "Come," she said to me. I didn't want to go. My whole body knew not to go. Some animal part of me was screaming to stay in the crowded classroom where there were witnesses, desks, familiar walls, any kind of barrier between me and whatever had risen with the rain. But the memory of those words on the glass sign, "Know what you did in the chapel," was still burning behind my eyes. And beneath the fear was something worse, a splinter of guilt, because of the hidden room, because of the photograph, because ever since last winter I had been waking at night to the sound of water dripping where there should have been none. I stood up. Owen caught my sleeve. "Dan, don't. I have to. Why?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know how to answer without saying too much. Miss Vale watched us with those pale, storm-colored eyes. "Mr. Mercer," she said softly to Owen, reading his name off a seating chart she hadn't touched. "It would be wise not to follow." Owen's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask you." A strange expression passed over her face then. Faintly pleased, almost affectionate. "You will," she said. I went cold again. Mr. Bell motioned me out into the corridor. "Moo." I stepped into the hall. The air outside the classroom felt wrong, in a different way warmer, but somehow thinner, as if the whole building were holding its breath. Students were beginning to gather at the far end near the stairwell, drawn by the disturbance. Teachers were trying to herd them back into rooms. The emergency lights in the corridor glowed weakly, even though the main lights were still on, making everything look bruised and half-shadowed. Miss Vale came out behind me and closed the door. From inside I heard no voices. No scrambling chairs. No whispering. Nothing. I turned. "What about the class? They'll stay where they are," she said. Instead of answering, she started down the corridor toward the chapel. Mr. Bell grabbed my shoulder and steered me after her. "Don't speak unless I ask you something." His fingers were shaking. We passed the office, the library, the narrow alcove where the plaster saint had been missing a hand for as long as anyone could remember. Water tracked along the baseboards from somewhere ahead. With each step, the smell of wet stone and old mildew grew stronger. The chapel door stood open. That alone was enough to make my stomach turn. Students weren't usually allowed in there except for assemblies, memorials, or the occasional suffocating lecture from Father Oran about dignity and obedience. The chapel was older than the rest of the school, or felt older, with its pointed arches and warped pews and walls thick enough to swallow outside noise. Last winter, Owen and I had broken in through a side window after hearing rumors about blocked-off lower rooms and a sealed staircase under the sacristy. We were stupid, bored. That was all it had taken. Now as we entered, the air changed so sharply it felt like walking underwater. Candles guttered at the altar, though no one had lit them for any service. Their flames were thin and blue. Rain drummed the roof overhead. The colored glass of the Saint windows cast smeared patches of bruised red and green across the floor. Muddy footprints trailed down the center aisle and vanished behind the altar rail. There were people inside. Father Oran, 2 police officers. Mrs. Hargreaves from the front office, pale as chalk with both hands pressed over her mouth. And near the left transept, where the stone floor had been pried open around a square iron hatch I had never seen before, stood the school caretaker, Jonah Pike, holding a crowbar and staring into the dark below as though afraid to blink. Nobody spoke when we came in. The silence in that room was not natural. It had mass. It pressed against the ears. Then Father Oran turned and saw me. Something fierce and frightened moved across his face. "No," he said immediately.
No, he shouldn't be here.
Father Oran's mouth tightened. "Then God help us." I looked from one adult to the next.
What is happening?
Nobody answered. Miss Vale walked straight to the open hatch. Rainwater had pooled around it in a shallow black ring. The stone edges were slick and old, carved with worn symbols I couldn't make out. Cold air rose from below, carrying the smell of stagnant water, rust, and something sweeter underneath. Rot. My stomach lured. There was a ladder built into the wall below the opening, old iron rungs disappearing into darkness. A battery lantern on the floor beside it sent a weak yellow beam down into the shaft, but the light seemed to stop only a few feet below, swallowed by the black. Miss Vale stood over it and closed her eyes, listening. "To think," she murmured, "they sealed it with prayer and expected memory to drown." Father Oran made the sign of the cross.
Who are you? She opened her eyes. Too late to ask?
Mr. Bell rounded on me. "Your coat. I'm wearing it." His face twitched. "Then tell me why there's another one below." Same tier, same badge, same initials on the label. The blood drained from my body. Inside my coat collar, stitched clumsily by my aunt, were my initials. DR, only one coat like that existed. I heard Owen's voice in my head from last winter, whispered through the dark under the chapel stairs. "Take it and let's go, Dan. No one will know." The photograph. The hidden room. The crying beneath the floor. No one will know. "Daniel," said Miss Vale without turning around, "what did you remove from this place?" Every eye in the chapel swung toward me. I stared at the hatch. I could not feel my hands.
Nothing, I said.
It came out too quickly. She turned her head slightly. Lying in a church is still lying. One of the police officers, a thick-set woman with rain shining on her hat brim, stepped closer.
"Son, if you know anything, now would be the time."
I swallowed. And then the chapel lights failed. Total darkness slammed down. Someone shouted.
Mrs. Hargreaves gave a choked cry.
Something metal clattered across stone. For a heartbeat, there was only the storm above and the sound of several people breathing much too fast. Then the blue altar candles flared brighter. Just enough light returned to shape the room in strips and edges. And from the open hatch came the sound. Not dripping, not movement, a child coughing up water. Wet, ragged, desperate. Mrs. Hargreaves screamed. Father Oran staggered backward into a pew.
"Shut it,"
he whispered.
"Shut it now."
Jonah Pike dropped the crowbar and made a noise in the back of his throat like an animal in pain. But Miss Vale knelt at the edge of the hatch and spoke down into the dark in a voice so gentle it made my skin crawl.
"Not yet."
The coughing stopped. Then a new sound started, soft and rhythmic. Knocking. From inside the shaft wall. Not one pair of hands. A pattern. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. "Please," Father Oran said. And for the first time in my life, I heard real pleading in a priest's voice. "Please, miss, whatever you are, do not answer them." Miss Vale rose slowly. She looked at me. "You already did," she said. The memory hit me so hard my knees nearly gave way. Last winter. The hidden stair. Owen above me with the flashlight. The plaster wall sweating moisture. My hand brushing a soft patch of wood beneath cracked paint. A hollow sound when I knocked it by accident. 3 knocks. And from the other side 3 back. I had screamed. Owen had laughed because he thought I was messing with him. Then something had moved under the boards, followed by that faint crying sound, thin as a kitten's. And we'd found the loose panel hidden behind an old hymn cabinet. Inside, a narrow storage cavity lined with rotten shelves, a rusted lantern, mildewed choir books, a broken crucifix, and tucked inside a warped frame, one old sepia photograph of a class standing in front of the school in heavy rain. 1 teacher. 12 children, all of them staring straight at the camera, all of them dead-eyed and soaked. I had taken the photograph because the teacher in the picture looked exactly like Miss Vale. I never told anyone that part. Not Owen, not my father, no one. Now in the chapel with the knocking rising under our feet, I felt that same photograph like a burn in my desk drawer at home. The female officer grabbed my arm. "What did you take?" I couldn't breathe properly. Miss Vale smiled without warmth. "There you are." Father Oran closed his eyes. "God forgive us." Mr. Bell stared at me as though I had personally peeled the roof off the building. "You stole from a sealed room under the chapel?" I didn't know. "Where is it?" "At home." The knocking below us stopped all at once. That was somehow the worst moment yet, because whatever had been down there was listening, and now it knew where to look next. A bubbling sound rose from the shaft, water moving. Thick water, slow and heavy, slapping against stone as if the level below had begun to climb. Miss Vale's gaze sharpened. "How far?" "What? How far is your home from here, Daniel? 10 minutes. In this rain," Mr. Bell snapped, "closer to 20. She ignored him. "And the photograph where exactly?" My desk off facing a window. I hesitated.
Yes.
Her mouth tightened. "Then we are late." The black ring of water around the hatch spread suddenly across the chapel floor. Not in a spill, in a deliberate crawl, like ink searching for cracks. It reached the nearest pew and began to creep up the wood grain. Mrs. Hargreaves stumbled back, sobbing. Jonah Pike retreated all the way to the wall, muttering prayers under his breath. From somewhere in the school beyond the chapel came a chorus of screams. Children. Dozens of them. Mr. Bell spun toward the doors.
"What now?"
Miss Vale picked up the lantern and thrust it into his hands. "The rain is inside." Nobody understood. Then the side chapel windows exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the floor in bright shards, and with it came a rush of cold black water carrying leaves, mud, and something white that slapped wetly against the stone near my shoe. I looked down. A child's hand. Not attached to anything. Just a gray hand, small and bloated, with the nails peeling loose. Mrs. Hargreaves fainted. Father Oran shouted a prayer over the roar of the storm, but the words were lost as more water surged through the broken windows. It reached our ankles in seconds, freezing enough to make my bones ache. Shapes rolled beneath the surface. Hair.
Fabric.
Pale fingers. Faces almost visible and then gone again. Mr. Bell shoved me toward the center aisle.
"Move."
The female officer drew her gun, which seemed useless beyond belief in a flooding chapel full of dead children. The other officer helped drag Mrs. Hargreaves toward higher ground near the altar. Miss Vale stood perfectly still as the water swirled around her shoes without touching them. "Listen carefully," she said. No one did. They were too busy shouting, scrambling, slipping on the rising black water. She raised her voice, and it cut through the chaos with unnatural force. "They are not here for the school," she said. "They are here for what was taken. If the photograph remains in that house when night falls, they will open every room that remembers rain." I stared at her.
"What are they?"
The candles bent sideways in a draft that smelled like a grave opened in winter. She looked at me with sudden, terrible clarity. The first class. Thunder crashed directly overhead. And from beneath the chapel floor, from the shaft now filling faster than any cistern should, A child's voice rose through the water and called my name in a whisper so familiar it hollowed out my chest. Not a stranger's voice. Not some ghostly imitation.
My mother.
"Danny," it said from below. "Bring it back." I had not heard my mother's voice in 6 years. Not really. I'd heard memory do impressions of her. Heard grief throw her into dreams. Heard the mind, in moments of loneliness, reconstruct the dead with cruel accuracy, the little catch in her breath when she laughed. The warmth in her voice when she said my name, the tired softness she got on late nights when she tucked blankets around me and thought I was already asleep. But what came out of the cistern under the chapel was not memory. It was her voice stripped down to the shape of itself and pushed through something rotten.
"Danny," it whispered again.
The water around my legs turned so cold it felt sharp. I think part of me broke right there because I almost stepped toward the open hatch.
I almost answered.
The need to hear her one more time surged through me so violently that it overpowered fear for one blinding second. My mother had died in Greywick General during a summer heat wave with no rain at all, and still some starving part of me wanted to believe this impossible thing under the chapel might be her. Miss Vale's hand closed around my wrist before I moved. Her grip was iron. "That is not your mother." The words hit me like a slap. Another rush of black water poured through the shattered windows. Pews groaned as they shifted. Candles bobbed on the rising current, their blue flames unextinguished, drifting like corpse lights. Mr. Bell was shouting at the officers to help clear the chapel. Father Oren had climbed onto the low altar steps and was trying to drag Mrs. Hargreaves higher while reciting prayers through chattering teeth. Jonah Pike stood frozen, one hand over his mouth, staring at the loose gray hand floating near the rail until the water rolled it away. Miss Vale pulled me hard toward the main doors. "Your house," she said. Behind us, my mother's voice rose again from the hatch, more strained this time, as if speaking through a throat full of water. "Daniel, it's dark down here." I jerked back involuntarily. Miss Vale's pale eyes fixed on mine. "If you answer it, it will wear her better next time." A violent shudder went through me.
"What are you talking about?"
But she was already moving. Mr. Bell saw us waiting for the doors and blocked our path. "Absolutely not. No one is leaving. We're locking the school down until what?"
Miss Vale asked.
"Until the foundation opens? Until they come up through the drains? Until every child in this building hears a dead voice calling from the walls?" Mr. Bell actually stepped back. Rain and chapel water dripped from his trousers. His face was gray beneath the freckles. "You don't know." Miss Vale looked toward the hatch. The shaft had begun to overflow in a steady black pour. Beneath the surface, faces were beginning to turn slowly upward. Not whole faces. Fragments, foreheads, closed eyes, cheeks pale and swollen, a mouth hanging open. Children. The female officer saw them and whispered, "Holy God." Miss Vale returned her gaze to Mr. Bell.
"I know exactly."
The nearest chapel bell began to ring overhead.
1.
Twice. 3 times. No one had touched the rope. Father Oren's prayer died in his throat. I knew that pattern. 3 knocks. 3 rings. It pressed against something in my memory that had been trying to surface since the moment I heard there was a body in the cistern, last winter. Beneath the chapel. The hidden room. And after I'd taken the photograph after Owen and I had bolted back up the narrow stairs, laughing too loudly to cover how shaken we had heard the bell ring 3 times, even though the tower had been locked and no service was scheduled. We ran all the way home in the snow. That night the first rain came, though it was January and the forecast had promised none. I hadn't thought about that in months. Or maybe I had and just refused to follow the memory too far. "Daniel." This time the voice came from somewhere behind me, low and urgent. I turned. Owen was standing in the chapel doorway. He must have slipped out of class, crossed the school, and followed us despite Miss Vale's warning. His hair was plastered to his forehead, glasses speckled with water, chest heaving. He took in the flooding chapel, the broken windows, the police, the open hatch, the black water full of half-seen shapes, and even then his first look was for me. "You left without me," he said, breathless, almost accusing. "Owen, get out," Mr. Bell snapped. But Owen's eyes had dropped to the water, and all color drained from his face. He saw a face there. I could tell by the way his mouth opened. His sister, Nora, had drowned when he was 10. Slipped from the old quarry path after heavy rain. Everyone in town knew that story because Greywick was built from stories like that, families politely ruined and then expected to continue attending Mass. "Owen," I said sharply, knowing without knowing. "Don't look." Too late. The black water around the pews bulged upward and, for one obscene instant, formed a child's head with wet hair pasted to its cheeks. A small face, lips bluish white, eyes closed. Then it collapsed again into the flood. Owen made a sound so raw it silenced everyone nearest him.
Nora.
Miss Vale crossed the chapel in 3 long strides and seized the back of his neck before he could step forward. "Do not give them your grief." He tore free and shoved her away, more from instinct than strength. "What is this?" "It is hunger," she said. Another bell ring shook the rafters. Then, from beyond the chapel, somewhere deep in the school, a loud cracking noise echoed through the walls. Wood splitting. Followed by more screams. The female officer swore. The classrooms. Miss Vale turned toward the doors. "The rain has found its paths." Mr. Bell hesitated, torn between the flooding chapel and the rest of the building. That pause cost him. A small pale hand shot up out of the water and clamped onto his ankle. He screamed. Everyone lunged at once. The officer grabbed his arm. Father Aran shouted something hoarse and useless. Mr. Bell kicked wildly, sending sheets of black water across the pews. For a second, all I could see was that hand gray, child-sized, skin puckered and split at the knuckles, nails rimmed with black mud holding on with impossible strength. Then Miss Vale bent, touched 2 fingers to its wrist, and said in a tone so cold it made the candles gutter, "Not his name." The hand released him at once and vanished beneath the surface. Mr. Bell stumbled back, sobbing with shock. Miss Vale straightened. "Now," she said, looking at me and Owen both, "you're coming with me." "No," said Father Aran. He had left Mrs. Hargreaves propped against the altar rail and was standing at the foot of the steps, robes soaked to the waist, face aged 20 years by fear. If the image was taken from the lower room, it cannot be returned by boys who do not understand what they touched. It must be burned. Miss Vale's expression sharpened. It would already have burned if fire could keep them. "You expect me to trust you? I don't require it." The chapel floor gave a deep, resonant groan. Everyone went still. Water was now knee-high. The stone around the hatch had begun to crack outward in black veins. Thin lines raced across the chapel floor toward the aisles like roots spreading under glass. Beneath our feet something shifted, huge and slow. Miss Vale looked up once, listening. "Choose," she said. "Save the school or preserve your pride." Father Aran stared at her, then at me, then at the widening cracks. Whatever argument he had was drowned by the next sound. Children laughing, not nearby, not outside, inside the walls, everywhere at once. High, wet, breathless laughter running behind plaster and under floorboards and through the pipes overhead. Mrs. Hargreaves began to cry in little choking hiccups. Jonah Pike crossed himself so fast his hand blurred. Owen backed into me, rigid with horror. Father Aran exhaled once through his nose, like a man stepping to the gallows under his own power. "Go," he said. "Bring it back." "And if it follows you, it already has," Miss Vale said. We left the chapel in a rush of water and noise. The corridor beyond looked like a dream of a school after drowning. Emergency lights cast a red pulse over the walls. Water poured from the ceiling tiles in steady ropes. Classroom doors stood open. Students and teachers were being shoved toward the gym at the far end of the building where the floor was higher, but many were frozen in doorways, staring as dark water moved against gravity along the walls in searching bands. As we splashed past room 12, I looked in. Every desk was empty, but the windows were coated from inside with little handprints. Dozens of them. Mr. Bell barked for the officers to continue evacuation and stayed behind with Father Aran, unwilling or unable to leave the building yet. That left only the 3 of us, Miss Vale, Owen, and me, pushing through the side entrance into the storm. The rain hit like thrown gravel. The schoolyard had become a sheet of rippling black water broken by hedges, benches, and the half-submerged shape of the Virgin Mary statue near the grotto. Lightning tore the sky wide over the cemetery wall. Trees bent and writhed in the wind. The town beyond the school gates looked blurred and liquid, all edges washed loose. Miss Vale did not reach for an umbrella. She simply walked into the rain, and once again it seemed to slide off her without soaking her clothes. Owen caught up beside me, shouting over the storm.
Tell me what's going on.
I took something from under the chapel. What? A photograph. You said nothing happened that night. I nearly laughed at the bitterness in his voice.
No.
I said nothing happened that I could explain. He stared at me through the downpour. And this is because of that? Yes, you could have told me. I looked at him. Would you have stayed? He opened his mouth, then shut it. That was answer enough. We crossed the road at a run as a white delivery van crawled past. Its driver pale and transfixed by the sight of us sloshing through floodwater behind a woman in black who never seemed to slip. Thunder rolled so close it made my teeth buzz. Greywick in heavy rain always felt older than itself. The shop signs looked too dim. The church spires too sharp. The houses too narrow and watching. Water rushed along the gutters carrying leaves, trash, and little clots of cemetery mud. Curtains twitched in windows. Somewhere a dog howled and then cut off abruptly. My house stood at the edge of Birch Lane, a narrow two-story place with cracked steps and white paint peeling in curls from the porch rail. My father inherited it from my grandmother, who always said the place settled badly when storms came in from the marsh. Since my mother died, it had felt mostly empty no matter who was inside it. Tonight it looked occupied. Every downstairs light was on. My father's truck sat in the drive, and in the front window, just for an instant before lightning erased the view, I saw someone standing behind the curtain. A woman-shaped shadow. Tall. Still.
Watching us come.
I stopped dead in the flooded yard.
My dad's home.
Miss Vale did not slow. Then pray he has not answered anything. We mounted the porch. The front door was ajar, opening and closing by an inch in the wind with a slow wooden knock. Inside, the house was silent. Not normal silence. No television. No kettle whistle. No footsteps overhead. Just that thick listening hush I had felt in the chapel before the voices began. "Dad?" I shouted. No answer. The hallway smelled faintly of damp wool and mud. Water had already been tracked across the floorboards in small bare footprints. "Child." Owen swore under his breath. Miss Vale stepped into the hall and touched the wall beside the umbrella stand. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. "They're inside." I wanted to say, of course they're inside. Look at the floor, but the words stuck when I saw where the footprints led. Not toward the kitchen, not upstairs. Toward my room. We went down the hall together, every old board creaking under our shoes. The house felt colder with each step. Framed photos on the wall had fogged from the inside as if filled with breath. The grandfather clock in the sitting room had stopped at 3:17 a.m. Water dripped somewhere upstairs in slow, deliberate taps. My bedroom door stood open. The desk lamp was on. The top drawer where I had hidden the photograph under old worksheets and a dead phone charger was pulled wide. Empty. For a moment my mind refused it. It just refused. Then I crossed the room in 2 strides and yanked the drawer farther out as if that could reveal some secret compartment. Nothing. No. The window was open. Rain blew in through the torn screen. Papers lay plastered to the floor. My curtains breathed in and out with the storm. On the desk surface, traced in rainwater that should not have been there, were 3 words. Too slow. Daniel Owen grabbed my shoulder. "Dan." I turned. My bedroom mirror, the cheap one nailed to the closet door, had clouded over. Slowly, from the center outward, a reflection was appearing in it that did not match the room. Not my bed, not my desk. Not the storm behind us. A narrow stone chamber lit by a swinging yellow lamp, rotten shelves, a broken crucifix. The hidden room beneath the chapel. And there, hanging crooked on the far wall inside the mirror, was the missing photograph. Miss Vale stepped forward at once. "The threshold's open," she said. My mouth went dry. "What does that mean?" "It means they did not come here to take it." She looked at the impossible reflection. "They came here to move the door." Then someone spoke from downstairs. A woman's voice. Warm.
Familiar.
Gentle. "Danny," it called. From the hall came the creak of slow footsteps climbing the stairs. My whole body turned to ice. Because Owen heard it too. And his face told me the worst part before he ever spoke. "That's your mom." I don't remember deciding to leave my room. One second I was staring at the mirror, at the hidden stone chamber reflected inside it like a wound cut into the world. And the next I was in the hallway with Owen at my back and Miss Vale moving past us toward the stairs with that same impossible calm. My mother's voice came again from below. "Danny, sweetheart, don't be afraid. It was perfect." That was what made it unbearable. Not ghostly, not distorted, not theatrical. It sounded exactly the way she had sounded on winter mornings when I was too sick for school, and she stood at the bottom of the stairs calling me down for tea. Warm, patient, almost amused. I could hear the smile in it. And because it was perfect, some part of me wanted to believe it. That part was a traitor. Owen caught my arm before I took another step.
Dan.
I looked at him. His glasses were fogged from the rain and the cold in the house. His face was sheet white, jaw clenched so hard a muscle fluttered in his cheek. He knew what was happening to me because he'd nearly walked into the chapel water when it wore his sister's face. "It isn't her," he said. My throat moved. "I know, but I didn't know. Not all the way. Knowing something in your head does very little when grief recognizes its own name." Below us, the staircase gave a soft creak. A shape moved across the landing wall in the glow from downstairs. Tall, slender, feminine. Not fully visible. Just enough to force the mind to complete it. Miss Vale stopped at the top of the stairs. "Stay behind me. Who are you?" Owen snapped suddenly, voice shaking with anger more than courage. "No, seriously, who are you? You walk into a flood full of dead children, you know all of this already, and you act like you've been waiting for it. Who are you?" Miss Vale did not turn. Lightning flashed through the open window behind us, bleaching the hall for an instant. Her shadow stretched unnaturally long down the staircase. "When the first children were taken," she said, "Greywick had no school. Only the chapel, the marsh, and a row of worker cottages that flooded every spring. The priest at the time kept records of burials, baptisms, marriages, and disappearances. He noticed a pattern before anyone else would admit one." The voice from below shifted position. One more stair. "Every time the rains came hard enough," Miss Vale went on, "someone heard a loved one calling from somewhere they should not be. A drowned brother from a cellar well. A dead infant from a grain barrel. A mother from a flooded field. Those who followed the voices vanished. Most were children. Thunder rolled over the house like furniture dragged across the roof." Owen said, more quietly now, that didn't answer the question. Miss Vale's head inclined by a fraction. "I was one of the ones who listened without following." I stared at her. She finally turned then, and in her pale eyes I saw something so old and so tired it emptied the room of air. "That was a very long time ago," she said. The step below us creaked again. My mother's voice, now just out of sight around the curve of the stairs. "Danny, I found your picture." Every hair on my body stood up. Miss Vale faced forward again. "It has learned the shape of your loss. It will not stop using it now." She started down. The staircase groaned under our combined weight. The air became colder with every step, and the smell in the house changed from damp wood to stagnant water and something sweetly foul beneath it, flowers left too long on a grave. The lights downstairs flickered in pulses, throwing the hallway in and out of shadow. When we reached the turn in the stairs, I saw her. My mother stood in the front hall with one hand resting lightly on the banister post. She wore the blue cardigan she had died in. I knew because I remembered helping my father choose it for the funeral, hands numb, unable to understand that clothes could matter when the person inside them was gone. Her dark hair lay damp against her neck. Her face was pale, but living pale, not corpse pale. Her eyes were wet. There was even a small white scar at the corner of her brow from a bicycle accident. She'd had it 13 and always complained about in summer because the sun made it show. In her other hand, she held the photograph, my photograph. The sepia image from beneath the chapel, its frame warped and dark with age. She smiled when she saw me, and the room broke open inside my chest. "Danny," she whispered, and her lower lip trembled exactly the way it used to when she was trying not to cry in front of me. "I've been trying so hard to get back to you." Owen made a strangled noise beside me. Miss Vale stepped down one more stair. The thing wearing my mother's face looked at her, and the entire softness drained from its expression in an instant. Its smile flattened. Its eyes became older than windows. Then, just as quickly, it turned back to me and the warmth returned. Don't let her take me away again. I took one involuntary step downward. Miss Vale's arm shot across my chest like a bar.
No.
The thing in the hall tilted its head, still smiling with my mother's mouth.
Why not?
He belongs to memory. The temperature dropped so hard every framed picture on the wall shivered in place. I heard water moving in rooms where there should have been none. Owen leaned in close to me, whispering with desperate force. Dan, look at the feet. I looked. My breath caught. My mother's upper body stood in the front hall exactly as it should. But below the knees, where the light from the sitting room failed and the shadows deepened over the floorboards, there were no feet. Only black water pooled around the hem of the cardigan, spreading and retracting like a breathing thing. Miss Vale descended the last steps. "What are you?" I asked, and my voice sounded very small. The thing in the hall smiled wider. "Hungry," it said. Then all the lights in the house went out. Darkness dropped around us. Not full darkness, there was lightning outside and the weak pulse of stormlight through the front windows, but enough that the hall became a place of outlines and sudden teeth-white flashes. The thing moved, not toward me, toward Miss Vale. The sound it made crossing the hallway was not footsteps. It was a rush of water down a narrow pipe, a body forced through an opening too small to contain it. Owen shouted. I heard wood crack. Miss Vale said something sharp in a language I did not know, and for one bright instant blue-white light burst across the hall. The thing struck the umbrella stand instead of her. It shattered into soaked black pieces across the floor. But the pieces were not pieces. They were children. For one impossible second, the hallway was full of kneeling shapes made of water and grave mud, small and shuddering, their faces blurred but almost human. Their fingers dug into the boards. Their clothes hung in old-style button collars, wool dresses, short trousers, stockings rotted to threads. And all of them were looking up at me. I backed into the wall so hard a picture frame fell and broke. One of the children crawled forward on elbows that bent too far backward, its face resolved. A boy no older than 8, skin bloated and split at the lips, eyes clouded pale as dishwater. When he spoke in my mother's voice, then all of them surged. Miss Vale opened the leather case. Inside were not books, not papers, not anything a teacher should carry. There were bundles of yellowed ribbon, a small rusted bell, 3 iron nails blackened with age, a narrow blade dull as old bone, and a stack of thin papers covered in hand script so faded they looked water-stained from the inside. She took the bell first. When she rang it, the sound was tiny, but every child shape in the hall flinched as if struck. The walls answered with a distant chorus of knocks. 3. Pause. 3. Pause. 3. The mirror upstairs cracked with a loud, splitting snap. I heard it from my room. Miss Vale did not look away from the shapes on the floor. They moved the threshold downstairs, she said. Of course they did. What does that mean? Owen yelled. It means the room under the chapel is no longer under the chapel. Then one of the dining room walls bulged inward. Not metaphorically, not subtly. The wallpaper swelled like wet skin, stretched and split down the middle with a long tearing sound. Behind it was stone, old stone sweating black water, a rusted lantern hook, the edge of a rotten shelf. The hidden chamber had opened inside my house. I think that was the moment Greywick itself stopped feeling real to me. Not because of the dead children or the false voice of my mother or the teacher who remembered floods from a century ago, but because a wall in my home peeled open and revealed another place entirely, as if space had folded for something patient and obscene. The photograph in the creature's hand slid free of its frame and fluttered to the floorboards. Every drowned child in the hall turned toward it at once. Miss Vale did the same. Daniel, she said, and I heard urgency in her voice for the first time, raw and absolute. Get it. I moved before fear could object. I lunged down the last stair, splashed through the spreading black water, and grabbed the photograph off the floor just as a small gray hand slapped down where it had been. The paper was freezing. It pulsed once in my grip like a living heart. The image on it had changed. The teacher still stood at the center in the rain, face pale and sharp beneath dark hair. The children still clustered around her in soaked uniforms with their dead eyes fixed on the camera. But there were no longer 12 children in the photograph. There were 14. One of the new figures was a girl with a braid over one shoulder, head tilted at an unnatural angle, lips slightly parted.
Nora.
The other stood in the back row, half hidden behind the teacher's shoulder, a boy with my face. Owen saw it over my arm and recoiled so violently he hit the banister.
No.
Something laughed from inside the wall room. Not from the hall. Not from the drowned children. From the hidden chamber itself, a deeper voice. Older. Content. Miss Vale's head snapped toward the opening. Her face changed not with fear, but with recognition so bitter it looked like hatred. "It's awake," she said. The stone chamber within the wall darkened as if clouds had passed over it, though it was already indoors and beyond sense. The rusted lantern hook began to sway. Water ran down the shelves in slow black strings. And from deeper inside that narrow, impossible room came the sound of many children shifting at once, crowded together in a space too small to hold them. The false children in the hallway froze where they crouched. Every one of their faces turned toward the opening in the wall. They were waiting. For permission. Miss Vale took the 3 blackened nails from her case and pressed them into Owen's hand. His fingers closed reflexively. "Stand by the door," she said. "If anything wearing love tries to leave this house, drive these through its shadow." Owen stared at the nails. "What?" "You asked who I am," she said. Another laugh came from the hidden room, low and waterlogged. Miss Vale reached into the case once more and drew out the narrow blade. "I'm the one they sent back." Then the thing in the wall moved forward into the doorway of stone. At first it looked too tall to be human, then too bent, then too thin. Water streamed off it in sheets, though it had not yet crossed into the hall. It wore fragments of a black dress or robe that clung in tatters to a body made of drowned angles. Its hands were long and jointed wrong, fingers ending in soft pale nails like waterlogged teeth. Where its face should have been was a shifting blur of features, one after another sliding over the next child, woman, old man, infant, blank skin, my mother, Nora, my own face, then something eyeless and smooth. Only the mouth remained the same, wide, smiling. When it spoke, the whole house answered in knocks.
"Found," it said.
And from upstairs, from my bedroom mirror now splitting apart in long silver cracks, came the sound of dozens of wet feet running toward the staircase. The sound coming down the stairs did not sound human. It had rhythm, yes, many feet hitting wood in frantic succession, but there was something wrong in the pace of it. Something too quick and too light and too wet. Like 100 children trying to run while half submerged. Between the footsteps came little breaths and laughs and the slick drag of water over plaster. I looked up. The darkness above the landing thickened. Small shapes were already spilling through it. "Move!" Miss Vale shouted. The drowned children in the hallway lunged at the same time. Everything happened at once. Owen stumbled backward toward the front door, clutching the black nails so hard I thought he might drive them into his own palm. I shoved myself sideways as 2 gray shapes hurled past my legs and slapped into the wall where my head had been. Their hands left wet prints and strips of black residue that smoked faintly on the wallpaper. One seized at the photograph in my hand with fingers like rotten roots. I kicked it away and felt something brittle snap inside its wrist. It screamed in my mother's voice. That almost made me drop the photograph. Miss Vale stepped between me and the opening in the wall room and slashed the narrow blade through the air. The blade made no ordinary sound. It didn't whistle or slice. It rang, a thin iron note that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. Every child shape nearest her recoiled, their faces wrinkling and slipping as if they'd been carved from water and disturbed by a stone. The thing in the wall watched. It did not hurry. That was the worst part of it. All the smaller horrors moved with animal panic and hunger. But the one in the hidden chamber, the smiling shape that wore faces as easily as rain, where the roofs of houses waited as though time itself had always belonged to it.
"Daniel!"
Miss Vale barked. "Look at the back." I almost said what, but instinct made me turn the photograph over. On the back, beneath mold stains in a jargon paper, words had been written in a cramped brown hand. "What is taken must be named, what is named must be returned. The 13th opens the door below." That were 13 names. 12 were old-fashioned names I didn't know: Agnes, Ruth, Peter, Eliza, Thomas, Miriam, Jacob, children from a century ago, maybe longer. The 13th, written in fresher ink that had bled into the paper as if added much later, made my stomach drop. "Daniel Rowe, no," I whispered. A child hit me from the side hard enough to send me crashing into the hall table. The lamp toppled. Drawers burst open. Batteries, old receipts, and keys scattered through the black water sloshing over the floorboards. I clung to the photograph with both hands and rolled just before another drowned shape slammed down where my chest had been. Owen shouted, "Dan!" I looked up in time to see 3 more of them pouring over the landing rail upstairs, not climbing but folding over it like sacks of wet clothes and then correcting themselves in midair, limbs snapping into place before they hit the lower steps. Their faces flickered between strangers and people I knew. One had Mara's eyes. One had my father's mouth. One, for a fraction of a second, had my own childhood face.
Miss Vale.
Owen yelled, "What do we do?" She never looked away from the thing in the wall.
We closed the That made no sense.
It must have shown on my face because she turned sharply toward me, and for the first time the years in her eyes seemed to come loose from whatever held them in place. In the storm-blown dark of my house, with drowned children swarming the hall and an ancient smiling thing trying to enter through the wall, she looked both exactly as she had all day and impossibly older. 25 and 120 at once. The first 13 were called in the rain and gathered by grief, she said. It taught them to answer. It made them open doors for it. I was meant to be the 13th. The hallway shook with another impact from the stairs. "But you,"
I started.
I did not follow when it wore my mother's face. Her voice thinned on the word mother, not with emotion but with age. So another child took my place. The count changed. The opening changed. Greywick learned to live around the wound instead of closing it. A drowned boy rushed her from the side. She drove the blade through a shadow instead of his body. The body burst apart instantly, collapsing into filthy water and a scatter of dead leaves. Miss Vale looked at me again. It has been trying to complete the number ever since. Understanding hit me with a nauseating force. The photograph. Yes, that's why it added Nora, that's why it added me. It writes the next class before it takes it. Another knock sounded inside the walls. Not 3 this time. Third, one after another. Steady, expectant. The thing in the hidden chamber smiled wider. Its face settled at last not into my mother's, not into any child's, but into a blank, soft approximation of a woman's face with eyes too deep and a mouth too human to be right. "Daniel Rowe," it said, and the house seemed to lean toward the words. "Come back with what was borrowed." Then the front door burst open behind Owen. Wind and rain hammered into the hallway. My father staggered in. He was drenched to the bone, one side of his forehead bloodied, breathing like he'd been running. I have never seen a man look more relieved and more terrified at the same time. "Daniel!" He saw the water, the shapes, the stone chamber inside the wall, Owen with black nails in his fist, Miss Vale standing in the middle of it all like a dark stake driven into the flood. Then he saw the thing in the hidden room. He froze. The thing's smile changed. Its face softened, not toward me, toward him. "Joseph," it said in my mother's voice. My father made a sound I'd never heard from him before. Not a shout, not a sob. Something from the center of the chest where grief sits when it's had years to root. Miss Vale turned like a struck match. "Do not answer it. Too late." "Lena," he breathed. The thing took one step out of the wall. The hallway darkened around it. All the drowned children went still as statues, their heads bowing in eerie reverence. Miss Vale moved faster than I thought possible. She raised the bell and rang it once. The tiny sound cracked through the room. At the same time, she shouted to Owen, "Now!" To his credit, Owen didn't hesitate. He slammed one of the blackened nails down into the wet floorboard exactly where the thing's shadow stretched toward the threshold. The effect was immediate. The creature convulsed. Not physically at first, but in shape. Its body split across outlines it had borrowed and tried to hold. My mother's face tore sideways into a child's, then an old man's, then a smooth sheet of skin. Its mouth opened too wide. Water erupted from it in a violent gush, hitting the walls, the stairs, the ceiling. All the drowned children screamed together, high and shrill and furious. My father dropped to his knees in the flood.
What?
"Something that remembers loss better than God does," Miss Vale said. And then she looked at me.
"Daniel, read the names."
I stared at the back of the photograph.
"What?"
Another drowned child launched itself at me from the staircase. This one wore Nora's face so perfectly that Owen cried out and took a step toward it. Before he could reach it, I swung the heavy hall table drawer like a club and knocked it sideways into the wall. It burst into black water and hair. My hands were shaking so hard the photograph rattled. "I can't, you can," Miss Vale said with sudden fury. "You open the door. Use your voice." The thing in the wall began to force itself forward again, dragging half its body across the threshold of stone. The nailed shadow smoked and hissed beneath it, but it kept coming. My father crawled toward me through the water. "Daniel, what's happening?" I looked at him and saw that he understood one thing, if nothing else. This was now about whether I lived. So I lifted the photograph and read. Agnes Bell, Ruth Mercer, Peter Vale, Eliza Thorne, Thomas Reeve, Miriam Pike. At the name Pike, the caretaker Jonah flashed in my mind. Same surname. Same bloodline, maybe. Greywick had built itself atop its dead and called the settlement tradition. The drowned children in the hallway began to shudder. Not violently, rhythmically, as if each name struck a tuning fork inside them. I kept reading. Jacob Hurst, Eleanor Ward, Samuel Creel, Beatrice Hall, Martin Doyle, Lucy Oran, Father Oran, the priest's name. His family tied into it too. Of course, the town had not merely survived the first class. It had been descended from it, marked by it, carrying it forward. The creature screamed. It did not like the names. It surged harder toward me, one long arm stretching across the flood with fingers opening and closing. Where its nails touched the water, little faces bubbled up and sank again. Miss Vale met it head on. She drove the blade into her own palm. Dark blood, too dark, almost black, in the storm lay tran down her wrist and onto the flooded floorboards. She pressed that bleeding hand flat against the stone edge of the wall opening and spoke in that strange old language again, sharper this time, commanding. The stone hissed. The hidden chamber shook. The creature recoiled for the first time in genuine pain. I stared at her blood. "What are you?" She did not look back. "Count the dead later," she said through clenched teeth. "Finish the names." My voice cracked on the last one. Daniel Rowe. The house went silent, utterly. No knocks, no footsteps. No rain, though I could still see lightning strobing in the windows. Even the floodwater on the floor stopped moving. The creature in the wall lowered its head. Then it laughed. A slow, deep, exhausted laugh, like something amused by a child attempting to bar a tide with bare hands. "Yes," it said. At last. The photograph burned in my fingers. Not with heat, with cold so intense it became pain. I cried out and nearly dropped it, but the paper had stuck to my skin. The ink on the back of the image began to move, the letters loosening into wet strokes. My name bled downward off the page, into the photograph itself, onto the face of the boy standing in the back row. His eyes, which had been my eyes, suddenly blinked. Owen swore. My father grabbed my arm. "What do I do?" I shouted. Miss Vale turned at last. There was blood at the corner of her mouth now. The hand she'd braced against the wall was smoking faintly where flesh met stone. But her voice was steady. "Return it," she said. "To the room." Her eyes locked on mine. "To the class." I looked at the photograph. At the teacher in the center, at the rows of rain-soaked children, at the boy in back whose eyes now moved with mine. Understanding came slowly, horribly. "The missing 13th, I whispered. Miss Vale said nothing.
She didn't need to.
My father understood too. I saw the knowledge hit him and turn his face hollow. "No," he said at once. "No." The creature in the wall smiled with my mother's face again. Every drowned child in the hallway began to whisper my name. Not loudly. Not menacingly. Almost lovingly. "Daniel. Daniel. Daniel." Owen stepped in front of me. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," said Miss Vale. "You don't know that." "I do." Her eyes flicked to the photograph, to the central figure standing among the children in rain-dark clothes, then back to us. Because suddenly I saw it. Not resemblant, identity. The teacher in the sepia image had always looked like Miss Vale. It was Miss Vale. Not someone like her. Her. Owen saw it too, and his mouth opened. "You were in the picture." "Yes, you were the teacher. I was the 13th. The words landed like stones. Miss Vale drew a slow breath. I was meant to enter with them. Instead, I remained between. Not alive enough to leave, not dead enough to join. I have stood at the edge of every heavy rain since, waiting for the door to open where I could reach it. She looked at me with something like sorrow. You were never the offering, Daniel.
You were the replacement.
The creature's smile faltered. Just a little. That was enough. Miss Vale moved. She tore her hand from the stone, seized the photograph from my fingers, and before any of us understood her intention, she stepped straight into the opening in the wall. The hidden chamber swallowed her to the knees in black water. The creature shrieked a sound so loud and deep it shattered every remaining window in the house. No, it roared, and this time the voice was its own, vast, feminine, ancient, wet with centuries. Miss Vale turned once over her shoulder. There was no fear in her face now, only completion. To be remembered, she said, is not the same as being fed. Then she drove the blade through the center of the photograph. The image split from top to bottom. The house exploded with sound. All the drowned children screamed together.
The walls convulsed.
The floodwater surged upward in a black spiral. My father threw himself over me. Owen went down hard against the banister. The thing in the room unfolded into impossible height, then collapsed inward, dragged back through its own doorway as if yanked by chains no one could see. And Miss Vale remained standing in the opening one last instant, her silhouette sharp against the dark of the chamber, hair lifting in the storm wind pouring from nowhere. Then the stone room sealed, not faded. The wallpaper slammed flat over it with a wet crack. The flood vanished. Every drowned child disappeared at once, leaving only a few dead leaves, streaks of black mud, and the smell of rain receding into old wood. The house went still. The actual rain returned plain rain, human rain drumming on the roof and rattling the gutters. For a long time, nobody moved. My father was the first to raise his head. The hallway was ruined. Broken glass, overturned furniture, water stains halfway up the walls. But it was ordinary ruin now. Storm ruin, not haunting. Owen sat up slowly, staring at the place where the wall opening had been. I pushed myself upright. There was no photograph in my hands, no blade, no bell, no leather case. Only one thing remained on the floorboards near the stairs. A class attendance register swollen with age and water. I picked it up carefully. Inside, page after page had rotted beyond reading. Names blurred, dates erased. Ink melted into brown shadows. Except for one page, the final page. At the top, in old careful script, it read, St. Agnes Parish Lesson Group Season of Rain. Beneath were 13 student names and, at the bottom, one teacher. Most of the ink had run. Most of the names were ruined. But one remained clear. Elise Vale Present. After that night, the rain in Greywick changed. Not immediately. Towns do not admit to miracles or endings all at once. But the storms lost something. People stopped hearing voices in flooded cellars. The chapel cistern, when finally drained and excavated, contained only collapsed stone and old drainage channels. No body in my coat, no hidden cavity. No evidence of what had been beneath it for generations except a few child-sized buttons and a rusted bell with its clapper missing. Father Oran retired before winter. Mr. Bell left the school the next year. Mrs. Hargreaves would not enter the chapel again. Jonah Pike started leaving little paper boats at the cemetery wall whenever storms came, though he never said why. As for Owen, he never again laughed at anything involving sealed rooms, hidden stairs, or rain on glass. Some nights when storms were bad, he still texted me just one word, "Awake?" and I always answered.
Yes.
My father and I never spoke plainly about what wore my mother's face in that hallway. We didn't have the language for it. But after that night, he stopped pretending grief was something you survived once and then finished with. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it had to be. I kept the attendance register hidden for months before I finally brought it back to the school and left it outside the locked chapel doors. In the morning, it was gone. No one claimed to have taken it. No one asked me about it either. But when the next rainy season came, a new brass plaque appeared in the east corridor outside room 12. No announcement. No dedication ceremony. Just a small plaque fixed to the wall where everyone had to pass it. It read, "In memory of Miss Elise Vale, who kept her class through the storm, no dates." No explanation. Students touched it for luck before exams. Teachers walked past it without comment. New generations asked who she was, and no one seemed able to give the same answer twice. Some said she had been a teacher who died young. Some said she had never really existed. Some said the plaque had always been there. That part still bothers me, because I know what memory does in Greywick when enough people agree on a safer version. Years have passed since then. I no longer live in that house. The chapel was renovated, the old plaster stripped, the side entrance rebuilt. Greywick likes to repair what frightens it and call that healing. On bright days it almost works. But there is one thing I have never told anyone. Not Owen. Not my father. Not any priest or cop or historian. The night before I left town for good, it rained. Nothing unusual. Just a soft spring rain brushing the windows, gutter water ticking down the drains, the kind of weather that makes every room feel a little occupied. I woke sometime after midnight because I heard something in the hall outside my apartment bedroom. Not knocking, attendance being called. A woman's voice, distant and gentle, speaking names I didn't recognize, one after another. Then silence. I lay there for what felt like an hour, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to move. Finally, I got out of bed and opened the door. The hall was empty. Dry. Still. Except on the floor outside my room, where a trail of small, wet footprints led away toward the stairwell and vanished before the landing. There was one more mark on the wall beside my door, written in water in neat, old-fashioned script. Not a threat. Not a warning. Just 2 words. Class complete.